class. For my in-flight emergencies, I'm going to talk about engine failure after takeoff. An engine failure after takeoff is considered as a failure of the engine to produce power once the wheels leave the ground up into including to reach 1,000 feet above the ground. It's considered one of the most stressful situations a pilot can encounter since the plane is moving at a slow speed, a low altitude, and you have a very short reaction time to react to the situation. This is a very serious situation and is the cause of many fatal accidents. Some of the causes and checklists you can do to solve this. The causes is because of air, fuel, spark, and mechanical. And the checklist for this, for the air, is during the pre-flight check, check for the air intakes. So you want to check for debris. Your airplane might be, sitting outside. There might be strong winds. You might get debris sucked in, to the engine compartment. People always say there might be birds' nests in there. That's if you're having your plane sit around for a long time. So just check your air intakes. Make sure that your engine's getting the proper air induction when you put that full power in. The next causes could be fuel. Again, during your pre-flight, you always want to sump your fuel tanks. No matter what, even if you fly your plane often, you still want to sump your fuel tanks just to make sure there's no water in the fuel tanks. There might be water in the fuel truck, and they might put that water in your fuel tank, and you might just also have the wrong fuel. So you want to check for the correct fuel and to make sure you don't have water in your fuel. And you also want to sump the engine sumps as well, because those might have water as well. The next is the spark plugs and magneto. So during your pre-flight run-up, you always want to check your mags. This is important because you just want to see if your engine's running rough before you take off, make sure your mags are working properly, and make sure there's not a lot of carbon built up on your spark plugs. So that way you can get a good combustion inside the engine. Next is mechanical. For the checklist again, during your pre-flight, you can always check the mechanical. This is another big one. This can be a little bit more difficult because you can't really see inside the engine. But you can still look at the engine and maybe look for cracks. Just see if anything outside the engine you can spot to maybe show a mechanic later on to see what he says. Also, you want to check the prop. A lot of people tend to forget this. The prop can produce a lot of cracks as well, and a little crack in a prop can cause a very serious situation later on. So always check the prop as well. For the takeoff brief, I think this is another important thing as well. I know for me, during my private pilot, even during my instrument training, I never really did a takeoff brief. We might have done a takeoff brief for what heading we're going to fly at, or departure, ATC we're going to contact later on, something like that. But we never really did a takeoff brief for emergencies. So now I started my commercial flight training. I started doing my takeoff briefs. Which can be very simple. It can take minimum time, and it can be easy as something like this. You say this is a normal takeoff. We have departing at runway 5 with 6,500 feet of runway, climbing altitude of 2,500 feet initial. If you have any problems before rotation, we'll abort the takeoff. Take off to 200 feet and up. We'll put it back on the runway. Since we do have a lot of runway, 6,500 feet. If you experience engine problems, just make sure you put it back on the runway as soon as you can. And then from 200 feet up into 1,000 feet, you're going to want to land straight ahead. And we'll discuss, if you're above 1,000 feet, you obviously want to discuss, you'll probably do a possible turn back to the airport. And we always have to remember the three things that we learned from the very beginning is to aviate, navigate, and communicate. So the first thing you want to do is fly the airplane. That is the most important thing. Especially if you have an engine failure right after takeoff, that's the only thing you should be doing is to fly the airplane. You don't need to do much anything else because you don't really have much time. So it's a very stressful situation. So to fly the airplane, if you have an engine failure, just pitch down. Don't continue to pitch up, and then obviously establish your best glide speed. Navigate is to choose the best landing site within 45 degrees of the runway center line. So you don't exactly have to land straight ahead. I mean, if there's a building straight ahead, obviously don't continue straight ahead. But you can make small turns to the left or right. They say up to 45 degrees of the runway center line, to the left and to the right. And avoid major obstacles. Obviously, again, buildings, power lines, poles. Again, you're not going to have much time to decide where you want to land. If you see a good spot, then most likely pick that spot and stick to it. Because a lot of pilots might pick that spot, and then later on, a little bit down the road, they might see a better spot that they think, and they might try to turn towards that spot, which they'll probably end up stalling the airplane. So just pick a good spot that you think and just fly towards a spot and try to put the airplane down as best as you can. And then communicate is last. This is not a big issue. You don't need to tell ATC that you have an engine problem. Most likely, if you're going to have an engine problem after takeoff, ATC is already going to know that you're going to have an engine problem. They're going to see you're not climbing, and eventually they're probably going to see you get off the radar. So communicate is the last thing you're going to do if you have time. Just because you guys always remember that ATC is not going to land the plane for you. You have to land the plane on the ground. Things to remember is do a complete pre-flight of the airplane. I know that we do pre-flight of the airplane every single time we go flying. Most of us are using student airplanes where maybe that airplane is being pre-flighted 3, 4, 5 times a day. But just because it's being pre-flighted before, it doesn't mean you should not pre-flight the airplane as well. It's just because if you can do a thorough pre-flight, that one thorough pre-flight that you do, you might actually find something wrong with the plane. Or maybe the student before you, or whoever flew the plane before you missed something. So you always want to double check, make sure you get a good pre-flight in. And then do a complete run-up and NAC check. Again, a lot of people might not do this, but for instance, you might have a private pilot who just went on solo cross country that didn't lean the mixture correctly. So, you always want to do a complete run-up, making sure that the mags are working completely and the spark plugs are fine. And then do a before takeoff brief as well, because a lot of people don't do takeoff briefs. And if you brief yourself right before you take off of what emergency procedures you're going to do if your engine does fail, then most likely you're going to succeed at bringing the airplane back down to the ground and landing safely. A lot of us get too excited. We're going down the runway, we're going flying. We get on that runway center line and we just want to put full power and think about what we're going to do next up in the air. But if you do a pre-flight, pre-takeoff brief, then you already know what to do if you do happen to run into this situation. So it only takes 15-20 seconds. Very smart idea. Then situational awareness. Where's the wind coming from? How much runway do I have? Do I have a 6,000, 8,000 foot runway, or do I have a 3,000 foot runway? If I get up 100, 200 feet in the air, do I have enough runway to put the plane back down on the ground, on the runway, if I lose my engine at 100, 200 feet? So always make sure you know your runway lengths and how much space you have. Also, to learn about good landing spots, this is another big one. For what I like to do is that I know what airports I'm going to go fly to. I like to look at Google Maps. Google Maps helps a lot because even if you never flew at the airport, you can look around the airport surroundings and you might find a baseball field or maybe just an empty field. You can kind of, see and learn about the airport, and maybe they might have fields, off to the runway or not. And then also, do not try the impossible turn back to the runway, especially if you're at low altitude. Do not try to turn back to the runway. I know a lot of us like to think that we want to turn back to the runway. We might be able to make it, but most likely you're going to stall the plane. This happened actually to a friend of mine at my local home airport. His name was Frank. It happened in September 30th of last year. He encountered the same exact problem that I'm talking to you right now. He lost his engine right after takeoff, and he tried the impossible turn back, which unfortunately ended his life. So just, continue to fly the plane, land straight ahead if you just took off. Don't try to do the impossible turn back because it does save lives. So I hope you guys learned something.